Hey, welcome back. Thank you for continuing to watch these videos where I travel through time and give you my favorite picks for best albums of each year from 1959. I'm going to go all the way to 2019. Right now, we are still relatively we're new in this journey, this time travel. We're only up to 1966, but it's a great year. Things are starting to really get interesting. Again, these are not what I consider to be the best albums of the year. These are just my favorite albums, the ones I tend to listen to the most, the ones that mean the most to me. And for the most part, I have all of these, but I think there's one I don't have, so I'll be putting the album art up in the designated spot. So I think that's all the intro stuff I have. So let's get into it. Wow, and we are going to really get into it heavy with this first one. So I don't know how I stumbled upon this album. I know that the song that I first heard came up on YouTube in my algorithm somehow, and I just decided to click on it. Didn't know who it was, had never heard of this person before, didn't know the song. But oh my god, this was, wow. Okay, so it's Patty Waters. The album is Patty Waters Sings. The song I heard is actually the last song on this album. It's called Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair. It is 14 minutes long, and the best way I can describe it is it's a love song. This lady is singing a love song while she is starting to lose her mind. What she's singing about is in real time driving her crazy. It is the most amazing, haunting, and just a crazy experience just listening to this. So based on that, I had to hear the rest of this album. And what's interesting is that the 7 songs before that track are all relatively short. In fact, some of them are only a minute and something. And their instrumentation is very stripped down through the whole album. A lot of times it's just piano and a little bit of percussion and maybe a bass. And the album starts off normal, but to me you get this sense, and maybe because I knew the last song was coming, but you get this sense that you're just on this slow downward spiral with her throughout the album, and the shortness of some of these songs also lends to this feeling of just something unsettling going on. And by the time you get to that last song, you're trapped in this woman's predicament in her mind. It's incredible. Is this really my number 10 favorite as far as how often I play it? I don't know. Maybe not. But it was important for me to get this in the top 10 because I think this album really deserves some recognition. It is literally incredible. So if you're ever in that kind of mood, go for it. Patty Waters Sings. Number 9, one that I do not have because it's ridiculously expensive to get a copy of it, even though I would love to get a copy of it someday, so I'm going to put it up here. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, his album Krishna Consciousness, also known as the Happening record because it was on the Happening label. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhu Swami. Wow. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. I can usually get that out without any problem at all. I've been doing a lot of these videos now, so my tongue is just, it's tired, it's done. Was the Swami, who brought the Hare Krishna movement to the United States and then to the rest of the world. And this is an album that he put out very soon after he arrived in America. The first side is an extended kirtan of the Hare Krishna mantra, the Maha Mantra. The second side has his spoken explanation of the Maha Mantra, and then finishes up with another chanting. This album was very important to George Harrison, he had gotten a copy of this album, and he played it. He played it for John Lennon. The story goes that after they heard this album, they were sailing around the Greek islands on a boat, and they were just doing the Hare Krishna chanting for hours on end until they both were hoarse. And it was all a direct result of George buying this album. So, yeah, great album. It's something I still, when I really need some chanting in my life, I go to this album. It's great. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Sorry, had to get it out again. Number 8, Bob Dylan, Blonde on Blonde, the epic double album. Side 4, one song, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. It is just a great album. This is Blonde on Blonde apparently had the sound that Bob Dylan had been searching for. It's very, to me it sounds very high-end, very tinny, but I can see why he liked it. The songs on here, Rainy Day Women, number 12 and 35, opens the album, which not a favorite of a lot of Dylan fans, but I love it. It's most people would know it by the refrain, "Everybody must get stoned," which, is not a drug reference. He's talking more about stoning in the old sense. Everybody must get knocked down, even though he knew he was playing with the double entendre of the drug culture at the time. Pledging My Time is on here. Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues again. Amazing song. And of course, Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat. Could this album be reduced to one single album? Yes. Would you want to do it? No. But I think if I had to pick my favorite songs off this album and make a single album out of it, it possibly could be my second favorite Dylan album. Blonde on Blonde. The full Dylan. Number 7. The Music Machine. This one is called Turn On with the Music Machine. And it has the single Talk Talk, which I learned Talk Talk from Alice Cooper's 1980 Flush the Fashion album. I knew it was a cover song. I was always interested in hearing the original. Heard the original, love the original. The original is really, one of my favorite types of music is really good 60s, just nasty garage rock. That really dirty amateur sound. I love it. And Talk Talk is so good. It is... the whole album is like that. Not as good as Talk Talk, but yeah. It's one of those great finds that I found in a $3 bin. Number 6, the debut album of one of the most important musicians in my life, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, Freak Out. I talked about this in the debut albums video, but again, briefly, Freak Out, these two albums were released right around the same time. They're both double albums, and there's still some question as to which is the first double album in rock music. It's probably Blonde on Blonde, But let's assume for a moment it wasn't. The fact that this freaky guy who hadn't released an album before, was new to his record label, and not even a major record label, it was Verve, so it was mostly jazz. The audacity to put out a double album, even if it was the second double album in rock history, it's still quite an impressive feat. You get blistering rock music on here. The Stones like Hungry Freak Daddy. You get full out psychedelia with Who Are the Brain Police. You get doo-wop on here. You get the whole of side 4 is just an avant-garde freak out. Really sets the stage for what Zappa was going to do years after. Number 5, The Beatles, Yesterday and Today. So this feels more like a compilation, even though it was not marketed as a compilation. But here is pretty much where all the unused songs that Capitol had been cutting off of the British albums were piling up, and they just put them all together. So as such, you've got songs from the British Help, you've got songs from the British Rubber Soul, you've got some 45s, plus you've got a couple songs, 3 songs, from the British Revolver, which wasn't even released yet. The Americans got them first. Dr. Robert, I'm Only Sleeping, and And Your Bird Can Sing. I like this album a lot. I've always loved this album since I was a kid. And I think that the running order and the presentation of it really helps, because there's songs on here that I don't really care for on the British albums, like Yesterday and Nowhere Man and Act Naturally, but I feel like on this album, in this sequencing, they work so much better. The album cover, if you know the history of that, this was not the original album cover. The original album cover was called the Butcher cover, photographed by Robert Freeman, I'm pretty sure. Had the Beatles sitting with broken baby dolls on their laps and slabs of meat in butcher smocks. Great. And but Capitol Records soon realized, after they made some pressings and released it, people weren't too happy with it, so they recalled all of the albums. And since they had all these Butcher cover albums, rather than remake the entire cover, they had this new cover designed. They printed out the covers and they just pasted the new cover over top of the Butcher cover covers, which became a highly collectible item, because you could tell, you could see through this cover to some markings, some identifiable traits, and you would know, hey, there's an original Butcher cover under here. So then very carefully you could steam off this cover, and if you did it correctly, you'd be left with a pristine Butcher cover album. This obviously is not a Butcher cover. This is an original, though, so this is what's called a third state. The first state was the original release of the Butcher cover. Second state is the Butcher cover with this album plastered on top. And the third is the first run of this actual cover. A little bit of history there for you. Number 4, the winner of our 1959 to 1963 competition, Howlin' Wolf, The Real Folk Blues. Anything by Howlin' Wolf. You could drop it in my stereo and I'm just going to be happy. Howlin' Wolf is one of the most amazing singers to me. The Real Folk Blues, not as strong as his earlier stuff, but again, all Howlin' Wolf is good. Even that pretty bad London Recording Sessions album, that's still somewhat enjoyable. But this album has Killin' Floor on it, my favorite Howlin' Wolf song, so that just elevates it to even higher standards. Number 3, soundtrack to Chappaqua. This is Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar, obviously an Indian sitar player, the master of the sitar, really. A lot of his albums are ragas, so it's usually like one whole side of an album is a raga. The second side is another raga. So you're looking at 20-minute pieces, roughly, give or take, which are amazing if you can dedicate the time and the attention needed for the raga. When he worked in soundtracks, though, he was able to kind of dice it up a little bit more for, I want to say, the Western mind, where we're not used to sitting and listening intensely to music for 20 minutes. So with Chappaqua, you get these little pieces of Indian music in bite-sized morsels. Plus, it's interjected with little bits of dialogue and other things from the movie, which breaks it up and to me makes it really interesting. Yeah, it's a very interesting album, and some great classical Indian music on it, of course, because Ravi Shankar is involved. 1966, my 2 top favorite albums, and I hate being predictable, but these 2 are probably the top 2 on 90% of people's top 2 1966 albums. And really, depending on where my mind's at, these 2 could be interchangeable, but I think for the most part, this would be the number 1 and number 2. So with the number 2, I'm going with the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. So much has been said about this album, and I'm kind of afraid that it's been lauded so much over the past 10 years or so, that, or even 20 years, that it might be getting to the point of where it's becoming overrated. But it deserves the praise it gets. Beautiful does not even start to describe this album. Brian Wilson was, yes, definitely a musical genius on this album. The textures, the sounds he was creating, and he had the best musicians at his disposal. He had the Wrecking Crew, the 1960s famous collection, or a collective, I guess more is a better description, of musicians that were used in so many studio recordings. They could play anything, and most of the time they were just called in to play normal stuff. But Brian Wilson was pushing these musicians into areas they hadn't been pushed into before, creating things that were making these highly professional, seasoned musicians going, wait a minute, can you do this? And Brian Wilson said, yeah, and we're going to do it, and it's going to be great. And they did it, and the musicians kept coming back to him going, oh my God, you did it, and it sounds amazing. So, yeah. The Beach Boys, up until Pet Sounds, had been, of course, the most successful American band. They were number ones. All the albums were number one hits. Pet Sounds only made it to number 10, which was not good. I mean, it was good, but this was seen as a commercial failure. And it became, even though it was critically applauded by most musicians, Paul McCartney still says this is the best album ever made, and God Only Knows is the best song ever made. It took a while before the public caught on and realized that it was a masterpiece. So that leaves number 1. Of course, if you know anything about 1966 music, you know what's coming. Revolver by the Beatles. And this is the British version. I know in the past couple videos I've been showing my love for the American releases, but you have to go with the British version of Revolver. The American album is sacrilegious. It just cuts too many important songs off. Well, I guess it cuts Dr. Robert, And Your Bird Can Sing, and I'm Only Sleeping. 3 John songs. So the American version becomes very imbalanced and just doesn't flow right. But Revolver was the last album where there would be a difference between the American albums and the British albums. When the Beatles contract was renegotiated for 1967, that was one of their clauses, is that the albums that we put together in England are going to be the same worldwide. No more of this countries doing what they want, specifically America. The Beatles, possibly at their peak, this album is actually in recent years stolen the fire from Sgt. Pepper's. When I was a teenager, it was just taken for granted that the best Beatles album was Sgt. Pepper's. These days, a lot of people are saying Revolver is the strongest Beatles album. And yeah, all the styles on here, and they cross a lot of styles, they all work. Even the weakest song, which I think is Yellow Submarine, for what it is, still works perfectly. It's still innovative. It's sing-songy, so it feels a little trite, but as I said, for what it is, it's perfect. And this album is a journey. It's a perfect journey. It's so well done. It's the Beatles' Revolver. What else are you gonna say? So that is my 1966 list of my top 10 favorite albums. Come back for 1967 because things are really starting to get heavy now. Do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think, and we will see you back here next time.